Thank you everyone for joining us this evening and for staying connected with Vestron and for supporting our mission and work. And with that, Joyce, I'll hand it over to you.
Sabah, thank you so very much. And thanks to all of you who are joining us. It is my pleasure to be with you and an honor to have all of our panelists with us who've taken time out of their busy schedules to be part of this tonight. So to our panelists, much appreciation to all of you. Now, before we get started and dive deep into some of these questions, I want all of our participants to know that you can submit your questions, and at about 7:15, we will get to those questions and answer as many of them as we can. You see a little chat box, a Q&A box on your screen. Submit your questions there, and they will get to me, and I will get to those questions again at 7:15. So if there's anything you want to know as we move through this program, don't hesitate to ask. There is no wrong question. So with that said, I want to get started. And again, thank you all for joining us. Okay, TJ Martin, I am going to start with you. And this question is for you, but then I want a reaction from everyone. And this is not on the list of questions that you all received. I don't see Vini, but I'm sure you are there, Vini. Thanks to all of you. My question to you is, do you think that we are at a pivotal moment in this country when it comes to a reckoning on race?
Oh, I mean, that's a huge question to start out right out the gate.
Bro.
Are we at a pivotal moment? Look, if I'm going to be completely candid, I think only time will tell if we're at a pivotal moment. Depending on how you spend your time and what your POV is on this country, you're kind of always at a critical and pivotal moment as it relates to race and class relations in this country. It just happens to be that if the cynical side of me happens to say, it just happens, like black pain happens to be trending right now. Yeah. We live in a day and age when everyone seems to be their own version of a brand, and the idea of advocacy is something that is potentially trending, and you can figure out a way to kind of align yourself with how you want your identity to be, more so than actually understanding what the issues are at hand. So if you're asking me, I think we're always at a critical juncture. It's just, what are we going to do collectively that happens next? And I think that's why conversations such as these are so important. So apologies if that felt like I was skirting around the question.
No. And I'm going to get to that question, what we'll do collectively as we move ahead. But Jesse, I'm curious about your take. Do you think we're at a pivotal moment in a reckoning on race?
Yeah, you came in hot with the first question. Nice job, TJ. My short answer is yes, and that's me trying to grasp the optimist within me, because there's not a lot to be optimistic about right now. My only hope is that this is a pivotal moment for us. I think the real answer is it can be, and this isn't a thing that is happening to us as a country. This is a moment, a window that's opening up that we can kind of climb our way through, and it's going to be painful to do, but this is a window of opportunity that we can act within if, we can keep our own attention focused on solutions. We can keep the country's attention focused on what's happening, and then also another hard part of this would be just growing our coalition of people in support of this movement for justice. And that's a tricky thing right now, especially with all the forces at work in the country to divide us.
And Vini, what do you think?
So I was, back in 2008, to date myself a little bit, I was a delegate for Barack Obama, and I had such great hope. And to me, that was the pivotal moment. We were going to change the world, and some older, and unsurprisingly, the world did not change as quickly as we hoped. And so I'm going to take your question and I guess kind of shift it out a little bit to match with TJ and Jesse a little bit and say that we're at a pivotal time, and it becomes our choice on how we handle it. And what I love about Jesse's answer is it's part of how we cast the net. As so in a point where we're having conversations of Black Lives Matter, we're engaging so many other cultures like mine, and that's growth. That's growth for our communities, which I suppose is a step forward.
And the youngest on our panel, Nate.
Yeah, I'm kind of going to go with what TJ was saying here. I think time will tell. I mean, my great grandma, she lives in Georgia right now, and you know, growing up in the 50s and the 40s, I mean, she would probably say that was a pivotal moment. You know, going through the 60s and the civil rights movement and stuff like that. So, I think, yeah, I like the pivotal time Vini was saying, and Mayor Vini was saying. I think that is a good way to put it. But I think these conversations have to keep moving forward in order for that change to happen. So like what we're doing right now. Yeah, I agree with time will tell, but it is a pivotal time.
All of your answers so interesting and varied. And I want to come back to some of your responses in just a moment. So TJ, I'm going to come back to you because I want to focus a little bit on the film industry. You've done some extraordinary work with your documentary filmmaking. And we heard a little bit about your documentary LA 92, which talked about the Rodney King case. How do you think the film industry has helped to right some of the wrongs of the systemic racism that we still experience in this country?
I don't know, to be honest, I don't know if the film industry necessarily has as an industry. I think individuals have, unfortunately. I think the film, and again, this is just my opinion, by no means am I an expert on this, but you know, I think like a lot of institutions, the film industry has been inspired to change by, to be quite frank, by force, right? In terms of like the numbers on inclusion behind and in front of the camera are still pretty grim. And the types of projects that get greenlit are, you know, they kind of go according to, again, kind of what I was saying before, according to kind of what's a fad at the moment, right? So at the moment, there's going to be, you know, when George Floyd was first murdered, Netflix's version of advocacy was creating its homepage of Black cinema, and which I think is, in some lights, it shouldn't be seen as a bold move, but in some lights it's seen as progressive. In others, is that a form of opportunism? You know, why isn't there kind of a default desire to show a wide variety of POVs and storytelling kind of on a consistent basis, because that's essentially what the landscape of the country is. But yet we're forced into facing, you know, into taking these actions always based off of kind of a really grim reality that always takes something really horrific for us to actually like face who we are and what we are. So, I mean, again, I think like most institutions, the industry is continuing to try to carve its path as a result of people within the industry that are forcing its hand to say, hey, you need to think about, you know, ways in which we can actually diversify our community, and as a result, get more interesting, progressive, dynamic points of views on storytelling. So like, for example, there's a filmmaker named Alma Harrell, brilliant filmmaker, who started a organization called Free the Bid. And Free the Bid is essentially an organization that is forcing the hand of agencies in the commercial space that every time they have a job, they have to bid at least one female director to helm that campaign, to helm that job. Prior to that, more times than none, it was always like 3 or 4 just white male directors bidding against each other. So it was like a forced inclusion, but it was also a tool that allowed people on the agency side who may have wanted, who had had the desire to see a more inclusion. It actually gave them a tool to use, and that's been relatively successful. And so you're starting to see the same kind of thing happen in the feature film space, where you have members of the DGA, the Directors Guild, who are starting to kind of form their own little organizations and really forcing the hand of the guild to be more inclusive and to be more progressive with the way in which they treat their members of color. And the Academy is doing the same thing. You know, I'm sure, I don't know if everyone saw, but they recently announced that by 2024, in order to be considered to be a Best Picture nominee, you had to kind of meet these 4 different criteria, or 2 of the 4 different criteria, which was essentially, in a broad sense, about inclusion in front of the camera and inclusion behind the camera. But if you looked at it a step further, it really wasn't kind of a progressive initiative by any means. And not surprisingly, there's a lot of backlash on it that just felt like that was an assault to the art form itself, by saying you had to have X amount of diversity hires, as people have put it, on the crew. But even that little kind of, even that gesture was as a result of another individual, an outside force, starting the Oscars So White hashtag. That was not an initiative that they took upon themselves, right? So all this kind of like really slow moving, subtle change has all been as a result of either outside forces, creatives within, singular creatives within, or creatives forming groups together to say, hey, we want to see our community and our industry do better. So, to answer your question, I don't think it's Hollywood or as an industry. I think it's individuals that are getting opportunities and then trying to create space for more opportunities.
Jesse,
it's a slow moving ship.
and I think probably a lot of corporations or industries might agree with you. Jesse, I'm curious about what progress you are seeing. You worked in the White House during the Obama era. You've worked with Rock the Vote, Equal Justice USA. What progress are you seeing as a result of the recent events? I mean, and do you agree, inspired by force, companies are changing slowly?
Yeah, no question. I mean, I guess every time you see an ad where people are, have BLM written across their chest, or there's fists raised and stuff like that, remember that the people who are on the board of that company only care if you buy Sprite afterwards. Like that is what is driving that ad. And, they don't want to get canceled. They don't want to get looked at like they're not part of the solution. So, I'll join you on the cynical platform on that one, TJ. Like, it's a nice thing to see my nephew said he logged into Call of Duty, and there was like a Black Lives Matter tag on there, and then you go shoot people of color for an hour and a half. It's a mood killer for sure when you start to really think about what moves the needle. But so I'll briefly just say there's actually a parallel there in the political world, which is, and I mean this in I genuinely mean this in the nonviolent sense of the word, but movements have to have force in order to reap any kind of change. So the fact that there are these broad coalitions of people in the streets, shutting down streets, calling systems out, demanding change, it is absolutely necessary for protests to happen if you're going to get politicians and government agencies and all of these kind of the machinery of government to react. It is part of the puzzle. I'm somebody who has chosen to work in my career inside government because I want to try to change, my place in the movement has always felt like, how can I get in here and start working the gears? But it doesn't work. You can't make change at a pace that's at all respectable if there isn't pressure from the outside and people who are setting the stage. And last thing I'll say is that includes voting, because politicians, you can want them to be morally right. You can want them to just have in their head what they need to do. But the way democracy is set up is they respond to who votes. So if, it's all, kind of older conservative white people in their district who are voting, their job is to respond to them. That is how it works. So I say that to say the pressure and setting an environment where it's like, hey, just so you guys know, my elected officials, I will always vote, and I'm always going to be right here. I'm going to make sure all my people are voting too. That is an environment where they have to start responding to what we say. Now, there's money and in politics and other factors. Mm-hmm. Maybe that'll come in another question. But.
So this is not on the list of questions y'all got, but if you saw the NFL Sunday Night Football, one place I think the whole country saw change. 4 years ago, Colin Kaepernick took a knee and the country was just outraged. Well, part of the country. I mean, talk about a shift. Roger Goodell now is apologizing, telling people give Colin Kaepernick a job, the advertising from the NFL, the athletes taking, talk about a shift in messaging. How significant do you think that was, what we saw on Sunday? And what's the broader message that it might send to other companies, institutions in the country, if at all? Nate.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That was obviously a very powerful moment, seeing that. And as we all know, the NFL has had histories of, some different beliefs other than, the movement that's going on. And I think that just I feel like it really just reached a whole different crowd of folks that probably weren't fans of the movement or really didn't, look into, or really didn't really pay attention to what's going on in the world and in the country as well. And for having all those players, stand there linked with arms and solidarity, I think that was, I feel like it was an incredible message to everyone. Everyone watches football. Well, most people watch football. And I think that was just a beautiful moment. So,
still highly controversial. I see you smiling, Vini, at that. It was still highly controversial. There are those out there saying, just stick to the football game. Let the athletes need to just play and not have an opinion. And there are others that think it was just beautiful and way past due. Your thoughts?
I don't watch football, but I'm a proponent of First Amendment, and so if you want to kneel, you should be able to kneel. I don't care. I thought that he should have been able to kneel 4 years ago. So I'm glad that there are minds that have changed. I think that's progress. But everyone has the right in this country to share their political perspective. And that is a glorious thing about this country. So,
and I'm just curious, because I do want to move on, but briefly, Jesse, TJ, in a sentence or two, did you have thoughts about what you saw on Sunday?
I didn't. So I didn't watch it. I didn't watch any football on Sunday. But if I remember correctly, the headline for at least the Chiefs game was that there was backlash on the sign of solidarity,
mm-hmm.
And so
it's controversial.
Yeah. So which is not surprising by any means. But I think the thing I find most challenging is there doesn't seem to be is not creating an avenue for a true understanding of the conversation, right? We don't really live in terms of like conversations that are happening on a national level. It is stripped of nuance. So it's either you stand, if you kneel, you are against the flag, right? And somehow that became a political thing, and there's a direct correlation to that idea. And there's no conversation in between. And to try to facilitate that conversation with empathy and with nuance and with understanding on a national scale seems to be extremely difficult. So I'm not surprised that there was backlash. I also am not surprised that there was a sign of solidarity, because the one thing that tells me is that at least the players are speaking to each other. And I love to see allyship being created amongst players. I think they're probably taking a page from the NBA, which has always been, as we all know, a more progressive league, more progressive sport. But my biggest fear is the same way, and we started this conversation with, is this kind of an opportunity, or are we at a kind of a critical juncture? I love seeing how diverse the coalitions are, but I'm also really discouraged by the blowback. And I think even though Roger Goodell is seemingly on the optics of things, leveraging the optics of things, I can't tell how much of what he's doing is kind of protecting his bottom line, to Jesse's point. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think my biggest concern is our inability to actually have a more critical and nuanced conversation where people are actually receptive and listening with and reacting with empathy, you know?
Jesse, what do you think?
I was actually going to echo what TJ said, because this is a forced action. I mean, you get credit when you do something on your own accord. You get a lot more credit anyway. And this is, a bunch of billionaires looking around at each other and saying, like, wait, these cats really might not play. And this is money, out of my pocket. And, somebody in the front office of the league saying, we think you're right. And so what are you willing to do in this moment to make sure that these cats play and make sure we get our money? Now that's cynical, but it's also, I think, pretty real. And, it'll be interesting to see if this is tied to a trajectory of change in the league. And I think that will only be told if there's money to be made in such a trajectory.
I'm going to move slightly to politics. Vinny, this is questions for you. I want to talk about Kamala Harris, African-American, Indian-American on the Democratic ticket. How significant is it that she is a woman of color on the ticket? And also nationally, how important is it that she's a VP candidate?
So this was scripted. I've been thinking about this question because it seems so simple, but back in 2016, when I was elected in 2015, but I first took office in 2016. And there was a mom that came to me and told me how her daughter had seen me waving my sign on the corner, and how excited she was that I was going to be the first mayor, not the first Indian mayor in the US. She didn't really care as much about that, but the first female mayor in my city. And she said, her name is Alan. And she at the time was 10, and she is white, as most of my community is. And she said to her mom, she's just like me, Mom. One of my people are going to be elected. And over the 3-4 years, well, I guess 4.5 years now, I've had these girls, these really young girls come up and in my community come up and talk to me about how maybe they'll run for mayor. And so when I see, I can't express, it's like a piercing in your heart. It's both joyful and pain. And it is that you hold this little wonder of a child in your hand, and they have hope because you did something. And it is in the universe, me being mayor of this community is a very small thing. In 150 years, no one's going to remember my name, but they might remember, hopefully, Vice President Harris's name, right? And she's like a beacon, because feminism has had white women at the forefront for a very long time, and they have marched hard. Kamala Harris says it's open to everyone, and that for all the girls out there, that's a beacon of light, and that's what that means, I think, and it has meant that to me. It allows every girl to think that she can be president, regardless of the color of her skin, including the white girls. So it's humongous, and I really, and I will say that being on the ticket is, I know this sounds harsh, but it's relatively irrelevant to me. Both parties have had females on the ticket. I want somebody next to that throne, and that will be meaningful. And so I echo whoever keeps saying this, vote, because that's, if you don't have people in power, having running is unimportant. I mean, I should say that running is important, but being voted in is where the money's at.
So do you think that the country is ready for a woman of color to be the VP?
Country's been ready forever. That's not the issue. And I disagree with both TJ and Jesse in the cynicism. And maybe that's because they're looking at it from a national level. I look at it from a tiny little place. And I know what America can be. I'm a first generation immigrant. And I bought into that dream. And so we can, every time we fail or we fall in this journey, or I guess we fail in a battle, we can look at the battle and become cynical. But I say giving up's not an option. You got to win the war, and each battle is what it is. And you can be ruled by cynicism and think about the billionaires in the back room making their decisions based on money. But I say that all those people that are marching, those are hearts. The reason I joined you on this is because I believe that our country has the ability, the capacity to be so much better. And if we don't choose that every single time, then of course we're not going to move forward. And so we choose cynicism as a POV, or we choose hope and light, and that's the only option open. You know, you don't get to choose cynicism. That is it's a stairway down under.
I see you smiling, Jesse. And then I'm going to go to you, Nate, because I'm curious as the youngest person on our panel.
See the way that my camera's set up, I don't know when people can see me in that. But
24/7.
Cool. Okay. Good tip. No, I actually think you're right, Vinny. I mean, I don't covet my own cynicism. It is hard won. And you know, so when I started in politics, so when I graduated from Western, then I worked for Western for a few years, and then I left straight from there to go join the Obama campaign. And I will say that working in local communities around the country was about the coolest thing I ever experienced. And, you know, candidate aside, it was just amazing to see people, you know, how they connect with politics, how they connect with us as organizers. And there's a lot to be optimistic about when you just look at human beings and, you know, the kind of the strength of the human spirit. And, you know, if we're in a moment of inflection right now, it is the the collision of that human spirit and that kind of positivity and that humanity and the corporate structures, the kind of the broken pieces of our democracy, the way our media is being siloed and turned into profit machines. All of this is kind of raising into a crescendo right now, and I think that's what we're feeling. It's a collision. So I say that to say my cynicism is mostly towards corporate forces, not America in general. So yeah, I have less faith in Sprite or Nike than I do in voters in your town or any other. Put it that way.
So Nate, what do you think it's going to take? The country seems so divided right now on so many levels. And, I think a lot of people are looking to your generation with all the hope in the world that maybe you all will correct where we have somehow failed young people. We're still trying, but somehow something is just, it's not working the way it should. It seems like the fabric of this country is ripping apart. So are you cynical, optimistic? And if so, what do you think it's going to take on whatever side you stand to bring the country back together?
Yeah, I am optimistic. I think our generation is doing exactly what they should be doing right now. As a matter of fact, I was talking about this with my mom earlier today. I think that it's the generation behind my generation that's going to make the real change, just because we're starting to have these conversations. I think it starts at a young age. I think it starts, in elementary school when we're talking about all of these issues and having these conversations. But yeah, I'm absolutely optimistic about everything. I think Kamala Harris is an incredible candidate. I'll just go ahead and say that as well. But not only does she represent, not only is she a woman, she's also a Black and she's an Indian woman as well. I think she's absolutely embodies everything that we need as a nation. She's an AKA, that's a historical Black sorority. And I think a lot of those young Black girls that are all over the country are going to see that and want to be that, be that person. So yeah, I'm optimistic. But I think not only is it going to take my generation to keep doing what we're doing, keep having these conversations, keep protesting as well, but it's also going to be the generation behind me, I think, is what's going to make the real change, because they are having these conversations in elementary school and in middle school. And I believe we have to start young in order to make the change. So, yeah.
TJ, go ahead.
I think the conversation of hope and cynicism is interesting, because it's not that, I believe at the end of the day, I don't know if I have much faith in systems, but I believe in people, right? And I have a tremendous amount of hope in people's ability to fundamentally look out for each other and look out for their community in the most positive way. I think jokingly, my creative partner and I, we always feel like we're total cynics on panels like these, because we're always like, well, but think about the other side, but it's not, at least in my particular field, I don't necessarily want to call it cynicism, but I find that there is a continuing model of storytelling that says, that's basically a continuation of Star Wars, right? It's just hope and the good guys win. And that idea has bled into the world of nonfiction. So every time, even if you see a film that is maybe about, let's just say it's an issue-based film that is a little hard to stomach, there's always this desire to say, give me the 1-800 number at the end. How do I fix this? Don't leave me on a sour note. And unfortunately, let's be honest, that's not an accurate reflection of the real world. So it's not that I'm a cynic. I probably leverage my cynicism in terms of using it as a means of being critical thinking. But for me, I'm much more interested in bringing a balanced look into storytelling. So can we have an ending of a film that is a little bit more sobering and not necessarily all's going to be well because this film told me so, and now back to my real life. And I think there is an overwhelming amount, there's an imbalance of the stories we tell ourselves that constantly have this like happy-go-lucky ending, like all is well in the world, which is just not an accurate reflection of our day-to-day lives. So it definitely comes off as cynic, but my interest is in in how do you engage critical thinking but execute it in storytelling that creates a space for everybody on this panel to have their own relationship with that story. And I'm not the one dictating at the end that everything's going to be okay. You should be able to come at the end and say, this was my take on that. Right. And that's where a lot of my interest lies.
I want to remind all of the people who are watching right now that you can send us your questions in the chat, the Q&A box you see at the bottom of your screen. And it's actually time for me to actually get to some questions. But before I do, because I think this is really important for incoming Western students or existing Western students, I want each of you, if you can do it in a minute or two, a minute would be better, but 2 is okay. Tell us what your experience was like at Western. And I also would like to know, which is a separate question, what your industry or field would look like if it were more diverse, if it had more people in it who looked like you. I'm going to start with Vini.
All right, so culturally, and you've gotten kind of echoes of this before on this, within the Indian culture, since I am a first-generation immigrant and I feel fairly culturally connected, what my banner has always been sexism. And so at Western, I was the co-chair of the Women's Center, and what Western gave me, and I think that will give every generation that comes in, is that it gives you that citizenship. What does it mean to be a citizen? It goes to what TJ said about the people, right? How do we change systems? We change the people. We change hearts, so we change minds. And that's what Western does. It allows us to change hearts. And if we can change hearts, we send our people out and we take over those processes, because that is what a system is. And to create processes that are fair to all of our citizenry. And that's, I mean, I think that's what Western does best, is it builds the citizen. The second question about my industry, it would be lovely if what my face was common. If you think about the fact that it was only a few years ago, and I'm the first female Indian mayor. I find that ridiculous, and it is. I mean, when I was elected, India has amazing newspapers, and it was reported in their newspapers. I had people coming, texting and emailing me from India who I have no idea who they are. And I sat there thinking to myself, it's so bizarre. So what would it look like, both in the law and in politics, to see people like myself? It would be phenomenal, and it would change the conversation, which is what I think TJ is saying, right? It's about changing the conversation and having a conversation. One of the questions I think we'll deal with later is about how people in our position need to make those conversations happen, and that's the importance of seeing people like myself in these places.
I'm going to have to get to questions in just a moment, but I do want everyone to answer that question. Jesse, why don't you go next?
Well, I'll touch on part of your question, which is my experience at Western, which is, I enjoyed Western. I had a good time. It was significantly less diverse than it is now. I'm like, wait, I wish I could see the students' faces as I say that. And it was an interesting experience that, you know, I'm light skinned as hell. So this is, I have my own unique kind of Black lens and experience. But it was an interesting way to kind of find my my home and my confidence as a leader and my perspective as an activist within the Ethnic Student Center and the Black Student Union, which was actually AAA when I first got there, African American Alliance, and we remixed that. But my first meeting at Western was at the Black Student Union, or was at the Ethnic Student Center, and then the BSU had like a 4-person meeting, and you know, they were like, somebody want to be VP? I was like, you know, so I say that to say, you know, when I think about what kind of seeded the fire in me to try to drive change, it did happen there. I know that it can be cold and soggy there. I know it can feel like you're isolated, but just know what you're learning there and some of the skills that you're learning there. I still use a lot of the writing skills that I picked up both in class and at the ESC every day. It will translate to the broader world.
I have a lot of questions, you guys. I need to get to them, but TJ, I want you to tell us how significant your Western experience was for you.
Yeah, I mean, I had very similar experience to Jesse in terms of not necessarily seeing an abundance of people that looked like me. Having said that, and I've always been a huge advocate of my experience there. I did not go to film school. I was a kind of a hybrid major between main campus and Fairhaven. So on main campus, I was an American Cultural Studies major, and in Fairhaven, you create your own concentration. I focused a lot on kind of multimedia projects. And there's a few things that have always that really resonated with my experience there, and I carry with me, and I use it in my work all the time. And for one, I was not the best student, so I learned a lot through my peers. The community that I built within the American Cultural Studies program is, to this day, those are still individuals that I call and show my work and have kind of critical conversations about maybe my own blind spots. And it's like a trusted voice, not just creating a safe space for myself, but also a trusted voice in terms of the critical thinking and the intellect that we developed on campus. And the other thing that really, paved the way for me, at least, is Western's openness to being able to integrate different disciplines. So yeah, I spent a lot of time focused on history within the American Cultural Studies department, but their openness for me to bring in some of my work in film and integrate that and allow me to create a space to figure out how do I execute ideas in a different medium that's not always just on paper, totally fundamentally shaped who I am and my career.
Wow. I have to get to these questions because there's so many great questions. Okay, Nate, this is for you. It doesn't tell me who it's for, I'm just choosing you, okay? In what one or two important ways can the faculty at Western and the staff do a better job to support students of color? Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first, listening to students, listening to the demands that students come up with as well, having a dialogue with them, what we're doing right now, especially in the day and age that we are in currently. I think this is one of the best ways that we can really just talk to each other and listen to students. There's a lot of different ethnic student clubs, Black Student Union being one of them, that have a list of demands currently for the administration. And I think the admins should really just open their ears and listen to students, which is super awesome. Well, which is what they should do. That will make it awesome. And then also, I think, which is huge and which was big for me as well, I had a lot of, not a lot, but a lot of POC faculty and staff that made a huge difference in my college career thus far. And so I would say maybe hire more diverse faculty and staff who can, reach out to just students of color as well. Someone they can look up to, someone who looks like them, which is super awesome. Coming from, I guess, working with the admissions office, Jesse Moore, I know you were an admissions counselor a long time ago, I heard, but going around different schools and stuff like that, and they see like a black, admissions counselor, maybe that they'll be more willing to maybe go to Western or be invested in Western or something like that. So maybe more representation of faculty and staff, and just always listening and taking in, but seriously taking in what students of color have to say. So yeah.
Thank you. It seems, let's see. Let's see here. There's so many good ones. Jesse talked about changing systems from within. I'd love to hear from Mayor Samuel about her experience working in local government and influencing local policy.
Okay, no small questions here.
Vinny, I'm going to ask you if you can, like in 2 minutes or less, if you can answer that.
Sure. So I was thinking to myself that one of the questions on our list was about reforming systems and systematic racism. And I just had a conversation with my police department, a really tough conversation with my police department. All my officers are white, and we had a kind of in-house conversation about race. I said, look, how fortunate for you, you have a mayor who's a woman of color. So we're going to talk about what that means and what that looks like and how I feel versus how you feel. And so part, I think, of how to deal with systems is to have those conversations TJ is talking about. And you have to do it with honesty, and you have to do it with humility. I love my officers, and but it's part of my responsibility as a woman of color to talk to them about what racism looks like, and how they act impacts me, and that even though I know how great of a guy they are, that the emotional feel of a person of color when dealing with law enforcement may not be reflective of who they are, but it is as to the system in whole. And so those are really, really difficult conversations. And we've had them. I've had them with my council. I've had them with my management team. I've had them with my officers, because that's what you have to do.
TJ, media and film are so influential. Do you think Hollywood has the power to change the narrative? Do you think that this generation who grows up seeing BIPOC heroes and leads instead of sidekicks won't be culturally conditioned to assume white supremacy like generations past? That question from Tanya. Thank you, Tanya, for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think representation is important. But I also think, and this is like when I get on my creative high horse, I think it has to go beyond representation. I think there needs to be representation behind the camera as well, right? When we're talking about creating opportunity, because one of the beautiful things about this particular industry is, unlike a lot of creative fields, people can actually, mass amounts of people get hired to create a film. And you can actually start families and have a middle-class living and actually have income, which is not the same for painters and musicians and writers. And so what happens behind the camera is hugely important in terms of creating systemic change and opportunity for those who have been potentially disenfranchised and never saw this as a career path. What happens in front of the camera in terms of representation, I think is hugely important to just remind ourselves that we are we have a voice, and we are a critical fabric of this nation. But I think it has to go beyond just ticking a box and saying, look, this is a reflection of the diversity of the nation. It's the ability to say, this is a POV that is distinctly representative of a variety of communities. And I think that when we get to that place, I'll be a little bit more optimistic about it, creating fundamental change, because it is very much about including a variety of ideas and experiences that elicit empathetic learning, right? Not just, here's the sidekick who happens to be, we're subverting stereotypes and now the lead is Black. It's, what is that lead person saying and doing in the film, right? Not just how they're cast. So we're getting there.
All right, Jesse, what about allies? Are there allies? Are we alone in our experience, or are others there to help in a genuine way? From Joe.
That is a very existential question, Joe. Are there allies?
Question, though. Are
we alone? Like, that's getting real. It's a great question. Yeah, there are allies. There have to be. This can't be, this isn't Game of Thrones. We're not all out with our own banners battling for supremacy. It can't work that way. It never has worked that way. So, I think the telltale sign of a true ally is, someone who is asking questions and doing so humbly, and somebody who is challenging the status quo in rooms where people of color are not. That is one of the toughest things for anybody to do, which is I guess sacrifice or risk, some of their social capital or their financial capital or their standing in their workplace, or literally just the risk of creating an uncomfortable situation amongst people that you know or that you don't know, and calling out racism or calling out, a microaggression or something subtle or something more overt in real time. Not easy things to do, but those are the kinds of things. What are you doing in rooms where it's not easy to challenge systemic racism or an individual circumstance of racism? That's allyship, and it's not common. It's very, very hard. It's much easier to kind of go onto our own social media and talk to people we know love us, and talk to people we know agree with us, and kind of promote, preach to the choir as loud as we possibly can and feel really good about it and go to sleep snugly. It's a lot tougher to look somebody in the eye who disagrees with you or who doesn't want you to make them feel uncomfortable or like they need to be challenged, and challenge them. I don't think that needs to be screamed in people's faces. That's not my style. That's not my vibe. I like to find a way to address an issue in a way that will reach that person, even if it makes them uncomfortable. But yeah, I guess it's a long way of saying, yeah, they exist, but recognizing them takes more than just a fist in the air or that BLM t-shirt.
Here's the next question. Given the divided response to the NFL players taking a knee in Sunday night's game, what do you think are some individual actions a person can take to educate others and talk to others who view those types of actions as disrespectful? From Diane. Who wants to answer that question? All right, Nate, thanks for volunteering. All right, Jesse. Jesse raised his hand. I saw you. Go ahead.
Dang. Will you restate the question? Because I was ready for Nate to get in there. Sorry.
Nate will think about it for him. I'm going to give you a pass for a second, Nate. The question is, given the divided response to the NFL players taking a knee on Sunday night, what do you think are some individual actions a person can take to educate others and talk to others who view those types of actions as disrespectful?
That's a tough one. That's a really good question. I'm not sure I know the answer because, you know, we're in a moment where if you have a different ideology than me, it's like you're a different species. And so everything is just such a hot and dangerous conversation to be had. But I will say this, one tool is to always ask questions. And I said that before. But if you're talking to somebody who disagrees with you, don't tell them what they're doing and how it makes you feel. Don't tell them what they think and how wrong it is. Start asking them about where it comes from. Ask them questions. Like, when did you start thinking this way? Have you always felt this way? What comes to your mind when you see somebody kneeling? What comes to your mind? What do you picture? And the answers to those kind of questions might surprise you. Might be kind of interesting. You know, I think a lot of us were surprised when people reacted that way to Colin Kaepernick, and, you know, but if you ask them what it is that makes you react that way, it's, you know, the answer, even subconsciously, isn't for everyone, well, I hate black people, or I don't think injustice is a problem in this country. They just have a very different relationship with the flag. And it's like a completely different conversation that they're having than the one that, you know, we're trying to have about justice and equality. So it's not a solution, but it is the beginning of a discussion that can actually be a little more fruitful or functional than just telling somebody that what they're doing is BS.
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, and I would say, it's a very difficult question, but I'll just say the first thing that came to my mind was that for the people that were against, standing in solidarity or kneeling, I would just ask, and maybe this is not the right way to go about it, but what form of protest can we do? You know, we're always getting hate on for marching peacefully through the streets or kneeling down or simply laying in the street. I mean, it seems like there's no right way to protest. And so I would just reverse the question, like, how do you want me to protest then? You know, I think that's the most peaceful way we could go about it, is standing, next to each other without saying a word at a football game. I think that's pretty peaceful to me. So yeah, that might be the wrong way to go about it, but that's just kind of the first thing that came to my head. So.
Go ahead, TJ.
I agree with Jesse. I think I think maybe one of the things that, I feel pretty comfortable with where my political leanings are, but maybe one of the things when we talk about being at a kind of a critical juncture, maybe one of the things that we need to take into account is there's still, even the way we're talking about this question as if there's an inherent assumption that the person who cannot agree with the kneeling is fundamentally wrong. I think that way, but can we ourselves actually take ourselves out of that assumption and simply learn where that point of view is coming from? So maybe it is a little bit more just about asking questions. And I've always found, and just basically by nature of my, what I do, when you start asking someone and being curious about their point of view, their livelihood, their own experiences, it's much more disarming. Instead of trying to get to a place just to kind of flip the script and find the flaw so that you can get inside and tell them why you think you have a fundamental disagreement with their POV. I think on a very human level, people want to be heard and they don't feel like they're being heard. And maybe this is an opportunity to not see who can shout the loudest, but who can listen with the most intent.
So,
and then go from there.
So I just want to add to that. I mean, it's not always a popular view these days, but, and I think maybe this is, TJ as a filmmaker and me as a speechwriter, and we're thinking, to a certain degree, we're trying to get inside other people's minds. We're trying to understand somebody who I need to bring over to a new place. And, that it's a really hard thing to do, but it requires being very curious, even in the face of, things that make me crazy, that make my blood boil, but still finding a way to be curious, to try to figure out where they're coming from. And then also look for there's something in there that's driving them that I can probably relate to, or there's something that's driving me that they can probably relate to. So I'm just like checking every window, every door. I'm looking for any way in to try to get in there and not just understand it, but that's how I can start to move the needle and start to bring them to a place where maybe they, you know, their point of view won't do harm on other people, or where maybe we can start to see a little more eye to eye.
So I want to add what.
I'm going to let you comment, Vinny, and then I'm out of time. I have to wrap up, but I do want you each to offer some words of encouragement to the incoming class. So I do want to hear what you were going to say, though, Vinny.
Oh, I was just going to add on, I mean, to make it kind of a simpler perspective, because I think that they work on a higher level than what, and is that there's only two types of conversations that I've discovered. One where I'm trying to prove my point, and the other where I'm trying to get closer to the other side. And if you're trying to prove your point all the time, you can't hear anyone and you don't change anybody. But if you try to understand what they're saying, and the other person has that same motivation, then you're going to move closer. And so the goal can't be, I'm going to change your mind. The goal has to be, I'm going to listen to you. And that's how movement happens. So I'll get off of that, and that's all I want.
I love all of your insight into this.
I'm just getting called out by the other politician on the call for being so goal oriented.
It was a comment that's complimented your comment.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, words of wisdom. I'm going to go backwards from how I started. I'm going to start with you, Vinny, and then Nate, and then Jesse and TJ. Words of encouragement. What words do you have for Western students and young people as they're continuing to fight for equality?
It is so important, each step that everyone makes and each conversation that you have. Don't give up. There's no giving in. You have, every generation has a piece of this. And so I believe in this generation, similar to what Nate said, you're phenomenal people, and you're coming of age in a phenomenal time. So going back to your original question, Joyce, if this time is going to be pivotal, it'll be your generation that makes it pivotal.
Nate.
Yeah, I'll start off by saying that, I mean, keep having these conversations. For the incoming class, you're coming in a crazy time. I mean, in the middle of a global pandemic, half the West is on fire, and then we're, having these conversations all the time. But keep having those conversations. I might seem kind of, feel like we're not going anywhere, but I think it's up to this generation, my generation, as I mentioned before, to keep it going. So keep going out in the streets and protesting, and just making your voice heard as well. And my dad always says, don't let school get in the way of your education, so just keep on learning from everyone, and just, keep fighting. That's all I have to say. Yeah.
Jesse.
Lean in. Just as bad as things feel and as bad as things get, because trust me, I mean, we thought this was, I'm going to curse on here. They can't really do anything to me, but we thought it was a shit show when George Bush got elected. We thought that was like, how much worse can it get? It can get worse, apparently, and it can keep getting worse. So I say that to say it can be so tempting in these moments of trial. These, brother just said, the West is on fire. There's a pandemic. We got people getting killed in the streets. In these moments, it can be so tempting to say, what am I even doing? Like, let me just back away from this whole thing, and, I'll shout from the streets, and that's going to be as close as I get to, this democracy. Do the opposite. Run towards the problem. Run towards what needs to be fixed, because we need more people with that mindset to be in government, in elected office, but even just voting and in your community, making things better a little bit at a time. It's not a, it's not a sexy answer. I'm just saying, you have to lean in. You got to run towards the problem. Otherwise, this thing doesn't work.
TJ.
I think when we dream about how we want to live in the world, I think it's always, and I could be speaking just for myself, but I find that a lot of people feel like there's this singular act of heroism. Like, when I reach this place, that will be kind of, I've accomplished the thing. And I guess I would say that it's, take this time to think about how you want to engage with the world. And it's a day-to-day thing. Jesse didn't work for the Obama administration just like, I arrived and here I am. This is someone who's been thinking and curating and thinking about their place in the world and how they want to be and how they want to relate to other people in their community. And, he built this wonderful identity as a result of putting in the work every day. And putting in the work every day, again, isn't like this massive act of heroism. It's how are you going to be comfortable with what you're putting out in the world and what you're consuming from the world. So I would say take this opportunity to think about that and think about how you want to relate to your community. And I find for myself that keeps me on my toes intellectually, it keeps me on my toes emotionally, and it keeps me in good graces with my friends. So
I'm going to add my 2 cents as I invite Sabah back to wrap things up. I agree, as a former Western student, lean in, listen to each other, keep learning. And I always say love beats out hate every time. So.
I just want to add, Joyce, thank you for doing this. Like, I've been fanboying this whole time. I've been watching you my whole life. So cool to see you.
I'm such big fans of all of you all. So, I mean, I was a little intimidated. It's like, oh my gosh, like, movie makers and politicians, but I'm going to step up and do it. But I've admired your work, and I've been stalking you all on Twitter and Facebook and social media and the internet. Your resumes are so impressive. I'm so proud to say that we're all alums of such a fantastic university. I could not be more honored to have done this whole webinar with you all. And I hope to stay connected. If you get emails from me, it's just going to be a hi, not a stalk. But thank you all for taking the time. I know you're so busy. People are pulling you in every direction. So on behalf of Western, we really appreciate it. We really do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, anything I say, it's going to go downhill from this point on. So I'll keep it really brief. It was an evening that was really thought-provoking for me, very instructive, very inspiring. Joyce, TJ, Vini, Jesse, and Nate, thank you so much for spending the past 90 minutes with us. We really are fortunate at Western to have such distinguished alumni and students. And I'm using the word distinguished not just in terms of what you have achieved in your professional career, which is distinguished, but also because of the humanity and humility that you bring to us, to your communities, to these critical issues. That's exceptional. So thank you very much. I hope the evening gives all of us an opportunity to reflect a little bit, to think a little bit about our own biases, about our own circle of influence, if you would, in terms of how we approach relationships and how we approach members of our organizations, communities. And thank you very much for really a wonderful evening. To our audience participants, thank you very much for tuning in tonight. We are grateful for your interest and support of Western. And thank you also for supporting our student recruitment and retention efforts, particularly for underrepresented students and students of color. through the Western Stands for Racial Equity Fund. I know some of you have been just wonderful in terms of supporting us from that perspective. I wish you all a very pleasant evening. Please be safe and well, whether it's the weather, coronavirus, fires. I am sure we'll get beyond that, and I am also optimistic that we'll come out on the other side as a more purposeful community and society. Thank you again for all of you being here this evening.